Well, good morning. It's another garage day here in Arizona. I got to get to it early in the morning so that the heat doesn't catch up to me. But we're back in the garage. We got the frame for the Nomad. We got to get started on it. First thing I got to do is start chasing all these threads out. There's a ton of powder coat on this thing. I got to get it cleaned out, and we're going to start assembling this thing, get the subframe on. I've already got 2 bolts holding it on. Then I got to get the steering stem bearing in there with all the seals and things like that and just start assembling this thing. I still don't have the engine. The shocks are on their way, so I can at least put the top arms on. I've got to rebuild the lower arms a little bit and do some other things, but basically we're just going to prep this chassis so we can get the engine, put it in, and hopefully have a roller right away so we can just go out and test ride this thing a couple times. So, which reminds me, we are just 2 months away from Vegas to Reno, which is what Project Nomad is for. And we've already raised about $1,000 for Racer Race 22 through our GoFundMe. So if you guys would go down, find the link in the description where it's always going to be, and at least share or donate whatever you can, dollars, cents, doesn't matter. We're doing pretty good this year. Let's see if we can get to that $5,000 mark this time. We did $3 grand last year. I don't know what we'll get this year. Every cent helps. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as we're going to help an organization like that. So please find it, share it, do whatever, share the video, and hopefully the word spreads and we get some more donations. So, without any further ado, let's get to it. Okay, first thing we're gonna do is take this little paddle wheel and the Dremel tool. This paddle wheel is like a real fine sandpaper grit, but it does a good job. It's pretty worn down, so it doesn't take too much material at once, at least. But take this Dremel tool, stick it down in here, remove any powder coat. Now my powder coater Tyler over at Powder Tech 2 does a really good job of masking stuff off, but they just can't get everything all the time. So there's a little bit that dripped over the edge. I gotta take that out of there because the bearing has to be able to pass all the way through that. So let's dig some of that out. All right, I've had this bearing sitting overnight in the freezer, so it should be nice and cold. This should be a little heated up from all the friction. It's not gonna be a lot, but the other thing that's gonna help me out a lot is this little Motion Pro bearing driver. Now, I bought a set. It's not a very big set, it's kind of a small set. I think there's one larger than this, but I bought it off Motorsport. It's a really cool little set of different size bearing drivers, and they have an inner and outer piece. Basically, if you wanna consider it, it's like a 3-piece. So you have your main piece, which is the base here you guys see. That's your outer race, that should sit on your outer race. And then this little piece here fits perfectly right into there, and you can get your inner diameter so it holds everything nice and straight and you don't end up rocking it back and forth on top of the bearing while you're trying to drive it in. So really nice little set, and everything's marked so you can actually see your inner and outer diameters and everything, which is really cool. So we're gonna use this and pound that thing in there. Shouldn't take too much force. The only thing that's hard is getting enough room in here with the hammer. Oh yeah, that sits perfect. It's like absolutely perfect on there. So let's get that thing in there without banging onto the frame too much. Line it up, start going to town. Yep. We are seated all the way up against that little notch at the bottom, or not a notch, I should say. There's like a little tab or shelf that's welded in there. It's part of the frame. And this is now seated right up against it. Nice. Okay, now we can pop the seals in. And no, I didn't forget. There's also this little pin, or this little C-clip that goes in there. Oh, wait, these things don't like it. So the next thing we're gonna do, we can go ahead and put the steering stem on, but before I shove it down into that new bearing, I gotta make sure I put the original, because we don't care about aftermarket right now, the original bushing and steering stem clamp up top. I gotta make sure I put some fresh grease in here. I just cleaned it out, got some of the old crusty stuff out of there, because it's been sitting for a long time. But the bushing's in good shape, so we're gonna go ahead and re-grease it, put it around our steering stem, and then put that up top, and then we can slide it down in there, and then that way I don't have to try to fish this around while it's already sitting in the bearing. It's got some good waterproof grease. Stuff I'm using is this Maxima waterproof grease. This stuff's worked pretty well for me so far. I use it on quite a bit of parts, so I'm just gonna keep using it. It seems to hold up pretty well, especially in heat and anything wet weather. All right, get this around our +2 Alba steering stem. Then we'll pull the old nut off, and we'll go ahead and fish this thing through here. And yes, these are the fast bars we're going to be using on this thing for this race as well. All right. Now, don't forget our new spacer for the bottom. Basically what this does is it feeds through the seal on the bottom of the frame, and then the shaft exposes through the bottom. Then you put your nut on here, and that way this sits on the inner race of the bearing, and then everything turns nicely. Get it through our seal. There it goes. And then get our steering stem nut on the bottom. All right, now got to torque down our steering shaft nut, which on these Hondas goes to 51 foot-pounds. So let's get down there and crank on this thing. Feel it sucking that steering stem down into that bearing. Really tight tolerance down there. These Alba stems, I mean, I don't think anybody should knock on these. They're pretty stout. Seen some of these Alba stems take some abuse, and they're machined pretty well. I don't really have any complaints. All right, here we go. Get that final torque. There it is. Nice. And it turns nice and smooth. Oh, that's gonna feel so good. It's also gonna feel good when we hit bumps and I actually have a steering stabilizer this time. I don't run one, but we definitely do for these. Okay, now put the clamp on there. Find some fresh bolts. At least between Jason and I, we have a buttload of OEM size bolts and spec bolt kits, and man, do they make life a lot easier. So I've already chased these threads. I've got an 8mm and a 6mm thread chaser. If you don't have one, you can just take a bolt, use a Dremel or something, file even, and cut a little line in here so it's almost like a sharp edge, and just run it down your threads and it should clean them out pretty well. I've had to do that in the past. And we're using some orange thread locker. I don't know, this is some new stuff I found. Couldn't find blue because they were sold out, and thread locker, if anybody's gone to the hardware store recently, has noticed it's extremely expensive now. So, little thread locker, get it into sink it down. There we go. And I will go back later and I will double check torque on these, because there is, believe it or not, in a Honda manual, there's a torque spec for everything, and I always follow it. Jason makes fun of me, but I don't care, because everything's torqued down and it shouldn't fall off. Okay, like I said at the beginning of the video, I've already chased these threads, put some red lock or some orange Loctite, whatever it is now, and set these in so I could hang this subframe on here. Now we're going to put the bottom ones in, and they lined up nicely. I didn't have to fight it, which is also very nice and rare. Usually these subframes come bent if they've been used by somebody, you know, I mean, just from rolling over or whatever, just years of riding. But luckily, after popping those top two in, these lined up almost perfect. So now I'm going to send these through and bolt them in. Nice. Use a little bit of Loctite, even though these are locking nuts, but it's nice to know that over 500 miles you've at least got some Loctite on there as well as a locking nut, because things rattle loose no matter what. We had a valve cover bolt come out last year, which I never thought would happen, but we learned that lesson. So, little Loctite, never hurt anybody. Okay, the next thing we got to do, there's a couple of these exhaust mount points. So basically there's some rubber bushings that go into these 2 points here where the exhaust will run up and then will bolt into your subframe here. Now, most Hondas, I should say at least all the TRX 450s, they all use the same rubber bushing, and they've got this little metal sleeve that goes inside the rubber bushing, and all you got to do is pull that out, lube this thing up just a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of grease again just to help me get it through there. And then you shove this sleeve back in there and it expands the rubber boot just a little bit, this little rubber bushing, so that it doesn't come back out and it's solidly mounted in there. Basically all this thing does is it makes sure that when you bolt your nut to the back of the bolt that's running through your exhaust, when you bolt it all up, it keeps this rubber bushing from squeezing and pinching and all kinds of stuff, and then you've got a loose exhaust mount. It kind of helps harden the thing up and make everything nice and solid. So let's pop them in there. And on the back side of this one, there's a lot of this bracing on the back side. So you want to go back there and make sure that this lip right here is popped all the way through and is sitting all the way on the outside edge, which this one has. Good. Now I gotta thread chase these in the back for the seat latch. Let's go the right way first. Those are pretty clean. I forgot to mention, I know I said PowderTech 2 did this frame. PowderTech did not do this frame. This was actually taken up to Lone Star Racing. They're just up in Mesa, and I had them gusset and powder this frame. It was pretty straight, simple, pretty straightforward. It was just straight gloss black. So they did a good job gusseting this frame and then powdering it to us and getting it back to me in I think like 3 weeks or a month. Maybe that was it. Either way, I just gotta get the seat latch on there. All right, let's see if I can get this spring hooked on there. And then get that part of the latch hooked into its part of the frame. Just don't want it snapping back out at me again. There we go. Holes lined up. It's nice the way that's designed because it kind of holds it in there while you get the bolts ready, so you don't have to worry about it popping off on you. But at the same rate, it's kind of difficult to get on there. I don't have to Hulk these down, but that's that. All right, one of the last things I'm going to do today, just because I've got some other things I got to do. I got to pack up for a trip here, but one of the last things I'll do, put in our steering stabilizer. Now this one is by Comp Custom CNC Parts. Not very familiar with it, but Jason says it works. We're gonna put it on, and I guess hope for the best. So all right, that's as far as I'm gonna make it for today. I just wanted to get a few things in place, some bolts, clean out some of the threads, clean out some of the bolt holes. Got the seat latch on, subframe. We have a radiator in. We've got upper arms on. I still have to build the lower arms. I actually, off camera, had put our PRP carrier on our Lone Star axle we've got sitting over there. I need to grease that because it basically comes ready to drop in. However, you got to add grease, and I always put it on the axle that way that the spacer in between the bearings is lined up when I start filling it with grease. So that'll be next. But next video, hopefully I have an engine and some suspension so I could put that in there and then start buttoning up everything on top of that. So fuel is going to be in another IMS tank. I think it's going to be the same one we ran last year, but you'll see that in the next video as well, and we'll just keep cranking on this thing. But if you guys enjoyed it, cool, thanks. Go ahead and leave something in the comments. Also, if you haven't, check out the link that I've left below for Racer Race 22. Our donations are still live. We're going to keep them open until race day, basically. So August 16th is the first day of that race week, and then we'll shut the donations off there. Let's see if we can get to that $5,000 mark. Not sure if we'll make it, but whatever. Let's go. Next video, we'll get some more stuff onto this thing. It should look a little bit more like a roller, swing arm, things like that, and then we'll be cranking after that. I should be able to test ride this thing after the third, fourth video maybe, and then it'll be probably a week or two before race week. But as always, thanks for coming by, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.